Hey, it's Mac with PriceActionTradingSystem.com, and it's Wednesday. It's February 15th. This will be our chart lesson for the day. And you can see here on the daily chart, it's an inside bar, but it closed on its high. It really was another range type day, and but we did close on its very high. We broke out above we made a measured move equal to the range, and then broke out above that before the end of the day. So and you can see we clearly bounced off this trend line another two times. So my guess is this thing's going to try to go higher. We're going to test these highs again. Whether or not we can breach them and move on, we'll have to see. I mean, it's definitely a lot of sideways, choppy, congestion type action here. And that's the thing about a daily chart. This might happen in 15 minutes or 20 minutes most on a intraday chart, but you've got to wait 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I mean, that's just 2 weeks worth of trading, and we're not done yet. So it just plays out so much slower on the daily chart, and so it's hard to. It takes a while to figure out what's going to happen. So we just got to sit tight and wait and see what happens here. To me, it looks like it looks a little like topping action. But today, when we didn't get any follow through selling, it looks like we're going to try to go higher. So it's really hard to know what prices are going to do here. And when you don't know what prices are going to do, you just sit tight and wait. So on this larger view, we're just sitting tight. Now, of course, we've got the intraday chart that doesn't mean we're going to sit tight there, but we just really don't have any clues longer term up here. Could still go either way. So that's what I'm basically getting at. But let's flip over to the 2000 tick chart, and we'll go through the trades and go from there. Okay, there's a couple ways to look at today. Really, we were working sideways, and you can see once we broke out here, we failed at first, but we ended up going higher. We made a perfect measured move. Even over into the 230, we were still working off this range. And then late in the afternoon, some buying came in, and they drove it a little higher. So probably a lot thinner volume out here. But there it is. That's There's definitely a trend up here. We didn't really get a lot of chance to play it off this trend line, but you can see uh, this was pretty strong in the afternoon because we did play off. Prices did play off that midline all the way up. And so we couldn't even get back in the lower. Well, we got back in the lower half briefly, but for the most part, we stayed above that. And so I would say, really, from about a little after 9 o'clock on, we were in an uptrend. Clearly, you probably were better off playing the trend here early on, but this is how I saw it after about 11 o'clock, whenever this low was made here. And so that's how I kind of see it for the day. But we'll zoom in here, go through the trades, and we'll wrap this day up. But if we zoom in here, we had early on we were just kind of chopping sideways. We had a trend down, then two legs up, and then we turned down again. So we were trading. We traded up this second leg up, and we were kind of trading down into the 7 o'clock hour. Again, we had this early 7:30 news. It wasn't that big a deal today, but you don't know that ahead of time. So right now, I would be out by 7:15 or so. So I didn't mark this trade. This trade was like it. That's right at 7:30 when this bar closed, so it's way too late to enter. 7:15 I think is right in here somewhere, and you don't want to enter on that. So you just had to sit tight, and then we topped out up here, turned down. We did make a lower high here, but you can't trade that as a lower high. So it's two legs down, and there's a nice second entry here way away from the EMA after a break and new low, but the signal bar is no good. And there's just nothing to enter here. It's too choppy, too risky. We get another second entry here, but again, no signal bar. And then finally, we get a second entry here. We've already had a break and two legs up to a new high. So that's concerning, but there's a two-legged pattern here that could be the center of a pattern, and we could be looking for a measured leg up like this, which guess what? That's exactly what we get. So when this rockets up and pulls back, gives you a second entry, maybe you go long there. The better option is wait and see if you get a higher low, which we do here. And so I like going long there. That's a second entry long, or actually the second entry was here, and then this is just a higher low. And we still didn't make a new high. It pulls back once more. You could say, hey, there's a continuation pattern, but this is not off the key entry point. We've already had a break and a new high, and we may not go any higher than that, so you can't risk that as a reversal or failure or whatever. It's not a reversal, it would be a continuation, but I don't think you want to risk that. That's not where you're going to look for a continuation pattern, because there's not much more room to the highs anyway. So, and of course we turn down, no signal bar, and it just goes straight down, so there's no real chance to enter that trade, unfortunately. We get a break, we try to make a new low, and then we just get a second entry long. Then we get a higher low here. I would not trade this, and actually this is not only is this a higher low, it's a first entry, second entry that fails. And I wouldn't trade this on the engulfing bar. I'd wait till this closed, and since it closes above the EMA, you could almost treat it like a reversal and go long. It gaps over right there, so I don't know that you're going to get a chance to get in that trade, but if you can, take that trade. And then we finally get a break here. We move up. We try to make a new high twice and actually get a second entry short right here. That looks a little congested. We didn't quite make a new high. We're kind of right in the middle of the range, so there's a chance you could pull back here and go higher. You're still yet. So no entry there. And we do drop down. There is a failure here, but again, down here bouncing off the lows, you need to be looking to go long, not short, even though you probably could have got a short out of that. It's not worth the risk, because now we're probably looking for prices to go higher. So on this failed break lower, I talk about these all the time. Many times these are important lows. They're risky. You really need to know what you're doing to trade these. Notice there's a trend down, a break, and a new low. But we could tick up and make another leg down. So it's always risky. But if you get a really good setup on a first break lower like that, a failure, I mean, you can clearly see the double bottom right there. And you can clearly see that looks like a good midline in there too. So there's reasons to consider that, we're in a range here, and this could be a failed break lower. And that's a nice signal bar way away from the EMA. So maybe you take that trade. And because, again, a lot of times they're important lows, or might even be the low of the day. And you can see how quickly that rockets out of there. You would have easily got a runner on this. And it runs up, gets a close outside. Runs to a new high. Where does it find resistance? Right at the last high. Then it makes a lower high right here. That's actually a second entry short. Not a very good signal bar though, but then you get a lower high, and then this breaks higher and turns down again. I would not trade this on the engulfing bar, but when it closes below the EMA, you could treat that like a reversal and it is a reversal off the highs or lows of a range. In this case, it's the highs. And maybe you go short right there. And technically, you might even look at this as a double top. And so you could say, all right, that's a first entry, and there's a second entry. But to me, it looks like two legs right here. And this is like your triple test or whatever. But you could trade it either way. It still looks like a first entry, second entry. So you might treat this as the failure and just call that a double top. You could trade it either way. And it drops on down. We get a break, correction, and we tried to go lower here multiple times. This is a higher low. The problem is it doesn't really make a triple test. It's not getting down there low enough, and there's not much room back to the EMA. So that's a little iffy to try to go long on, especially when we haven't made a new low here yet. It ends up taking off, but you just can't bet on that. There's not a good enough. There's actually a first entry, and then that little inside bar makes a lower high, so a break above that is technically, by the counts, a second entry. So but it's congested. It's below the EMA. It's just not a good setup. Uh, I don't like it. I wouldn't risk it. And of course, we run up here. We get a closeout side where we try to go higher once, twice. We didn't make a new high, but now we got a triple test on a break. And this is the first break out the high side since we've made all these highs right across here. And they're really consistent. So the first time it's probably going to fail. So on a triple test, maybe you take that. It is a little congested. There is some support here where the resistance was. Um, but on that triple test, you know, if you can get in there and there's enough room to get a scalp before you get to the lows or even to the EMA, take it. If not, question it. And of course, it just bounces across here and then runs higher and gets a failed breakout. I don't think you want to try to go short there because we didn't even get back to the lower trend line, and now we're working back to the highs again. So even though we could turn down, I would sit tight and see if we're not going to go higher. And of course, you come back here, you make a triple test there, and then you make another test. And if you drag this on over, it's clearly a triple test, maybe even a quadruple test, but it's a second entry long as well off this support, look how many times we turned up off that midline. If it breaks higher there, we're probably going higher. The main thing is just make sure you got room to get out before here, and you got plenty. So it doesn't matter. It just takes off. Get a close outside new high. Try to go higher once, twice. Fails. If you got enough room coming, really the failure was when it breaks below this bar, but this bar makes a high, so that's your signal bar, and that's where your safety stop has to go. But you enter one tick below this if it breaks below it. And so put your stop there, and if it breaks below it, you're going to go with it, and boom, off it goes. And then this is a double top, so this is a first entry and then a second entry that fails and turns down again. Maybe this one you trade on the engulfing bar. It's one of those that you could if you really like it. It's right off a key entry point. It kind of confirms that key entry point. If you wait till this closes, it's a relatively big bar and it's more risky then. You still could go short below it. I think it would be okay. And it takes it a minute, but just continues off here. Then finally you get a break. And here you get a first entry, and you try to go higher, and when it breaks lower, that's a second entry short. And since it breaks higher again, but you don't want to treat that like a reversal. We're getting too close to the lows. It's basically making a double bottom. It actually makes a two-legged pullback, even though that's a new low. You could consider that's two legs back to the EMA. And then maybe you could argue you got a triple test there as well. I didn't mark it, but it's there, and after the fact, let me get a line across there just to make it easy to see. You can clearly see there's a triple test there. And you could call that two legs back. So if you see all that, maybe you take that, and you might even call it red, but that's a little more advanced. You really need to see all that to want to take that trade, knowing too that on this trend channel, the trend line's down here, and the midline, of course, is way down here, and the previous low is way down here. So there's a lot of room to go lower there. Either way, even if you're playing this trend line. So it ends up bouncing around and going higher. And you could almost argue there's another triple test here, but the signal bar is no good anyway. And of course it runs up, breaks back out. First entry, pulls back, and you get a second entry long right there with a nice signal bar, and it's a higher low than off this trend line. I like going long there. You don't know that it's going to spike up and go into this really strong channel, but you would expect to get a scalp out of that, and maybe more. But it spikes up, it goes into this channel. You don't really confirm this trend line until it's way up here, and then it's really getting kind of risky to enter up here. There is a second entry long right here when it breaks above, but it's an inside bar, and those are very risky. It is right off the key entry point, and you can see it's only like 6 ticks. So, if you really want to be aggressive, maybe you take that second entry. But I would wait and see if you get a high or low, which of course you do right here. So if it breaks above that, go with it. We did just make the measured move too, so that's another reason to be thinking, hey, we could get a break here any minute. And you can see we just all we do is we retest that again and then turn down. And this thing just rockets down. There is a high or low right here. The problem is we just came off the high. We made a lower high and we shot right through the EMA. And the odds are you're going to pull back and test it. And you see we did, and it held for a moment before it went higher. And the risk here is that it pulls back to test that and sucks you in and then turns down and heads back down to the trend line, because the expectation is we should be going to the trend line most likely. And that didn't happen, but that's the most likely scenario there. So it's, even if you are going to go higher here, you're expecting prices to try to make a retest of this low. And you see they did, and they really struggled, and they couldn't, and they eventually went higher. So anyway, this trade's not 100. You're not guaranteed that you're going to get a winner here, because you could get your second leg up in the break higher just like you did, but then turn down, and that's the risk. So I don't think there's enough. That's high probability enough to risk even calling it green. It's just real risky, because the expectation is we're probably coming down here. So no trade. And that takes us into 2:30. I don't see anything else I like there the rest of the day. So anyway, there it is. Not a lot of trades today. Fairly simple. I mean, this was a fairly simple range to find. Somebody asked me why I didn't have mine up here, which I did early on, but once we kept making lower lows, and you got to say, hey, that's not the low, and you get to looking, and you make more low, you touch it there, and then you end up with a more equal breakout here. You do up here, maybe not quite equal, but pretty close. And then you can see the midlines fitting real nicely in there. So I believe, so that's why I moved mine early on. I did have mine up here too. But later in the day, I mean, if this is strong support, you shouldn't be getting pushes through it. Here's the problem. Up here early on, that looks pretty good. You only got one push through it, maybe two. But when you keep pushing through, then then that tells you, hey, this is not that strong a supporter. We wouldn't keep failing unless we're going to go lower. So we probably got something better lower down here. And I believe right across there is probably where you get the best fit. And you can see the midline fits pretty good across there. So that's how I played it anyway. And that's how you want to attempt to play. You might have to adjust these lines during the day. We might suddenly start making all lows, consistent lows, 5 or 10 points lower, or we might start making consistent highs 5 or 10 points higher, or even 3 or 4 or 5 points lower. I mean, there's no set rule there. You just have to see what the price action gives you and make the changes as you see it in real time. So, still plenty of trades today. I mean, it's a shame you get a move like this. If you don't catch the original move, then you'd be chasing it pretty much if you tried to enter anywhere else. There's a possibility, if you notice here, there's one little tick back, but that still looks like all one move up for the most part. So you could say, hey, this looks like a failed second entry short, and it's close to the EMA. It's not exactly touching it, so maybe you treat that as a failure and a reversal, but I'm not crazy about it, so I think you're better off to wait. There'll be better trades than that. Of course, today there weren't many better trades than that, but if you're starting earlier in the day, you had plenty of trades here without having to risk something like that. So anyway, I'm going to wrap it up. We'll be back again to do it tomorrow. Tomorrow's Thursday. That's going to wrap up our week. I'm done for today. This is Mac with PriceActionTradingSystem.com, and we'll see you next time.